So learning how to use hoop houses, poly, insect netting, shade cloth, frost cloth are such an important skill for a gardener because it's going to change how you grow your garden and take it to a next level. You can experiment with planting out earlier or later, and you're going to secure your garden from any type of pests that can ruin your plants. So I am going to be splitting this video up into 3 parts because there's so much information to cover. Part 1 is going to be about all of the products that you need and where you can buy them. Part 2 is going to be about how to actually build your hoop houses. And then part 3 is going to be some do's, don'ts, considerations, and some failures that I've had over the years, just so that way you can learn from my failures and not make the same mistakes. So with that, let's get into part 1. It feels very timely to be talking about cold frames and hoop houses right now, considering Ontario has been plunged into this random cold snap that we've gotten. Apparently we're 10 to 12 degrees Celsius below seasonal, which when our seasonal is 20 degrees, that means we are at half the temperature. And even though it's the end of May, past our last frost date, I'm still out in pants, a long sleeve, and a vest. And I could really use a hat and mitts right now because it's quite cold out. So today I'm going to take you through everything you need to know to build a hoop house for your garden. And it's not just for cold snaps like this, but these hoops stay up in my garden all season long because they do greenhouses with poly in the spring and the fall to extend your season. You can cover them in shade cloth if you live somewhere hot or you're going through a drought, and you can also cover them in insect netting. So if you plant something like I have here, which is a bunch of cabbage and cauliflower, I can have this covered in insect netting to keep all of the cabbage moths away and protect them, since they don't need any pollinators. So this is up year-round because there's uses for it quite literally year-round. You can try and grow in the winter, you can plant earlier in the spring, later in the fall, and in the summertime put in a whole new cover on it. These are so versatile, which is why, again, they stay up all year long. So I have 2 garden beds. Right now this one is covered in poly and this one isn't because I do have cabbage in here, so they really don't need any protection. But I have soybeans planted in here, which means they do need protection. Here in Canada, where finding products is a lot more difficult than in the US, I'm going to show you exactly what products you need to buy, how much they cost, where you can find them, where you can get the 3 different covers and their uses, and also how you can install them in your garden, because there's many different ways that you can install them. So I'm going to take you through all of that in today's video. If you're new here, my name is Bree from Urban Gardening Canada, and I garden in Ottawa Zone 5. And even though we're in Canada and I am in a Zone 5, it should not be this cold out. I have planted a lot of my heat-loving crops already, and then I had to panic cover them as I tried to put frost cloth over top of everything to protect it. But I am going to switch out that frost cloth for poly because we are going to only get 11-degree highs over the next couple days, and that's just too cold. So I'm going to make sure that when they're covered in poly, it means that they can get as much heat as possible during the day. It is going to rain over the next couple of days, and that means that there will be no rain getting into the garden, but it honestly doesn't matter because I watered them this morning and the water's just not going to evaporate quickly in this type of temperature, so it's a non-issue. However, it would be an issue for you if you kept them on long term in the spring or the fall and you didn't allow any rain to get into it. You will want to make sure that you're watering it or removing it during rainstorms. So I did want to mention that this video was inspired by a viewer who asked a question about my hoops, and I decided that this would make a great topic. So if you ever have any questions and you'd like to see a full video on it, make sure to leave a comment below and let me know, and I'm happy to make a video if it makes sense and it's something that I'm knowledgeable about. Thankfully for me, I've been using hoops for years and years. I've had so many failures along with these successes, but otherwise this is years of knowledge that I've put together in order to make a hoop house that is strong enough to withstand the rain and the winds, because that's really important. In a perfect world, I would love to buy metal piping and bend it into shape because it's a more sustainable option. but I haven't had enough time to research if that's possible. Plus you have to build a jig in order to bend it into place. But I am hoping to upgrade to that in the future, so if I ever do, I promise to make another video of that. But in the meantime, I've been using this plastic piping. So this piping is plumbing piping, and it's called PEX pipe. And from what I've seen with US channels, they do have straight piping that can be bent into shape. However, here in Canada, any of the straight plumbing piping is not that flexible in order to bend it into these hoop shapes. And the only option that we have is a PEX A piping that comes in a large roll. Now the benefit about this is that it's flexible, but the downfall is that because it's coming in that round shape, it's really hard to take it back out of that shape. And so when you're trying to measure it out into a specific length, it's wobbly, it's rolling up, and it's really difficult to work with. And then depending on how big the roll was, if the roll came in a small shape like this, then this constantly wants to go back into that. If it came in a roll like this big, but you need it to be this small, then it keeps on going into that shape. And so it is a bit of a nuisance to work with this piping in order to get it into the proper hoop shape that you're looking for your garden. Because of course the piping is going to change based off of how wide your garden is, how narrow it is, or how low or high you want to make these specific hoops. So for example, on this garden here, my hoops are quite large, plus it's a 5-foot wide garden. So not only do they have to reach 5 feet across, but they have to be tall enough because I want it to be able to cover an entire cauliflower, an entire broccoli, or if I have peppers or tomatoes in there, I want it to be able to stay covered until the plants have grown quite large. So I made sure that my hoops were high enough for that. So the other benefit of these hoops is because they're plastic, you can cut them with any type of a saw. So we use a hacksaw. If you own a hacksaw or a table saw, like a miter saw, a circular saw, even a multi-use tool, you can cut these easily. So with the hacksaw, it's just manual. We cut them off. You don't need any fancy tools, and they're not super expensive to buy. But just make sure, because these are plastic, you can't change the length of them. So it's really, really important that you make sure that you cut it to the right length. And I'll show you how to do that later in this video. So this is the first thing that you can find. And again, this is in the plumbing section. So learning how to use hoop houses, poly, insect netting, shade cloth, frost cloth are such an important skill for a gardener, because it's going to change how you grow your garden and take it to a next level. You can experiment with planting out earlier or later, and you're going to secure your garden from any type of pests that can ruin your plants. And all of these are tips that you'll find in my gardening course that I offer. It's an online self-paced course that has over 100 actionable tips, and that includes these hoop houses. So today's video is a small portion of what you can get in the course in order to take your gardening to the next level. And when we get cold snaps like this that are totally unseasonal, where we're 10 degrees below average, you'll already know what to do because you learned it in my course. There's lectures, videos, and worksheets that you can take with you into the garden, so that way you're actually learning and it's not just theory based. So if you're interested, you can grab that in the link below in the description, and you can even sign up for a free preview where you get a couple of the lectures for free. So I really recommend checking it out. So next that you can see on here, I actually have a few connectors on here, but you can see that I have the hoop that goes around, and then I have a cross piece hoop that sits on top, and this is going to protect the weight of the poly plastic from any snow or rain, although there's only a minor amount of snow that it can actually cover. And so these are using different T connectors, or in this case, that's a 4-way connector, so it's an X connector. And again, these come in the plumbing aisle of Home Depot as well. These were originally the hardest thing that I was looking for. They're called IPEX, I-P-E-X, and I had a really, really hard time finding these, but thankfully my dad was able to source them for me. But this was about 5 to 6 years ago, and since then I have found them at Home Depot, and they're at the end of the aisle on a shelf full of boxes, so it's not right beside your piping. But thankfully you're able to find these now. You can get these off of companies like Lee Valley, since they do sell gardening supplies. However, they are significantly more expensive from Lee Valley than they are at Home Depot. So I really, really recommend looking for these at Home Depot or a local hardware store before you go to Lee Valley, because you'll save a ton of money. So you might notice on here that I have a 4-way connector here and here. And the reason that they are on here is because I keep reusing my pipes over and over again. I used this for a different project that needed the 4-way, and I don't need it specifically for here, but because they're the same size, they're really, really hard to move along the piping. And so I leave them in place because it's just too much effort to move them around, and it's just not worth it. So I leave them on there, and that's why you'll see there's a connector here, 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 2 more over there. And that's because of one of my failed projects that I'll show you at the end of this video. Will explain why I have so many of these on here. And then the next thing that you need is a way to clip the poly insect netting or the shade cloth onto your gardens. So this is where greenhouse clips come in. So these specifically are made to clip onto the hoop, and they hold your poly in place. The most important thing when it comes to buying your piping, your clips, and your connectors is that they all come in the same size. So if you buy a piping that's 1/2 inch, this needs to be 1/2 inch and this needs to be 1/2 inch. If you buy 3/4, same, 3/4, 3/4, because otherwise you end up with something that won't connect. For example, these are 1 inch connectors and this is 3/4. And as you can see, it just doesn't stay on it because they're the wrong size. So make sure when you are buying all of these different products that you are making sure that they all tie together and they're the same size. So as we go along in this video, if you do find it helpful, make sure to hit that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment below on what you are finding useful in this video. It really helps me and my channel as I continue to grow, and I appreciate any chance you can get to hit that thumbs up button. So after you get these 3 items, the next thing you need to do is get cover. So it really just depends on how you plan on using it. If you want to use it as a cold frame or greenhouse, then you're going to want to get a poly cover. And if you're going to Home Depot, this is in the vapor barrier section. That's what this is called. So this is specifically for when you're building a house and you have insulation in the walls, you cover it in a vapor barrier after that, and that's exactly what you're going to be using. You don't need to buy some kind of fancy greenhouse cover from a greenhouse store. This just comes from Home Depot, and it's called Super 6 because it's a 6 mil poly. Now this is going to be the most expensive part of your entire purchase, especially if you're choosing a PEX piping that is only 50 to 100 feet. But otherwise this poly can get really expensive. So learning how much you need means you can keep the cost down. You can get 500 square feet, 1,000 square feet, or 2,000 square feet. But if you do go up to the 2,000 square feet, you're looking at a minimum of $100 for the roll, Canadian. And it actually goes really fast. So you really do want to make sure that you aren't buying too little, because then you're buying twice as much. You'd be surprised with just how little a roll of poly can cover if you have multiple raised beds like I do. And the thing that you can see here on this one is I have it installed backwards. So I have a ton of it hanging off the sides here, and I have too little of it on the side, so the wind is blowing right through it. That's not useful, so I'm going to show you how to close it up after. But right now this wasn't really necessary to be on here because it just had spinach and kale in it, and only today did we plant soybeans in it, so I do have to fix this one. So the second thing that you can put on it is frost cloth or shade cloth, and that is again what you saw earlier in this video as I was trying to frantically cover up my vegetables for the cold snap that was coming through. They're essentially the same thing whether you buy frost cloth or shade cloth. What it does is it's just a really light fabric blanket that covers your vegetables and protects them from frost, but it also filters out light so that way you can get shade on your plants. So this is beneficial for 2 reasons. You can use the frost cloth as a double layer inside of your poly greenhouse in the spring and fall, where you can lay it on the inside and then you put this on top of it where you don't need the hoops for the frost cloth, or you can cover it the way that I did, like a light blanket, just to help hold in 1 to 2 degrees of temperature inside of your plants, just to help prevent actual frost from hitting them. The other option is you can use it as shade cloth. So for example, if you're going through a heat wave and you have lettuce or spinach in your garden, you do want to cover them in some shade cloth because it's going to help lower those temperatures and stop them from bolting as quickly. It's not going to stop them from bolting completely, especially if you're in 40-degree weather, but it is going to slow it down. The other thing it's good for is tomatoes, because they are a Goldilocks plant. They want temperatures definitely above 10 degrees Celsius, but once you reach over 28 degrees Celsius, the tomatoes stop ripening. And so adding shade cloth over top of your tomatoes will help lower that temperature, so that way your fruit ripens quicker. The last option is insect netting, and this is specifically for plants that you want to keep insects out of. And it will be plants that don't need a pollinator, because you don't want to be covering plants that require pollinators like cucumbers or zucchini or any type of squash, because if they can't get access to those flowers, you're not going to get any fruit. Technically, tomatoes, eggplants, and peppers are self-pollinating. However, food lasts longer on the shelf and tastes better when it is pollinated by bees. This is a research topic, so you definitely want to avoid covering them if possible. But if you do want to cover them because you are overrun with potato beetles or tomato hornworms, then you can totally cover them in insect netting. Otherwise, this is really good for foods like corn, your brassicas like spinach or lettuce, and this is just going to prevent anything like the cabbage moth from laying any of their eggs. You can even cover it over potatoes if you wanted to. Now, not all insect netting is created equal. You can buy it off of Amazon. I have tried to buy it off of Amazon one time during COVID when I was in a pinch, and the company I normally buy it from was really delayed in shipping. But I can tell you that the quality off of Amazon is nowhere near as good as farm stores. So if you're in Canada, I love to buy my insect netting from William Dam Seeds. They have the best insect netting. It comes in farm length quantities at a super affordable price, so you can cut it up and put it over your different gardens. It has a great width and a great length, so you can use it on more than one garden. And it just is woven better. It has weight to it, so it sits better on your gardens. So I highly recommend looking there, or if you're in the US and you have a company like Johnny's Seeds, they'll also have insect netting there. But from what I've seen, they only sell in really large quantities for more expensive pricing. So you do, if you're in the US, you definitely want to shop around a little bit, but I really recommend looking for a farm store over Amazon first and foremost because of the quality. So when it comes to the poly, you might think that it's only good for spring or fall for your cold season crops, but actually it's perfect for times like this right now where we're past our last frost date, but it's not quite warm yet. So last year I planted my peppers in my raised bed here and I covered them in poly. So even though the temperatures were above 10 degrees, the days were above 20 degrees, this whole garden was 100% peppers. I covered it in poly for a couple weeks, and that raised the temperature at nighttime a little bit higher, and during the daytime it brought it from 20 degrees up to 30 degrees. And it was the best pepper year of my life. That 2 weeks of being under poly, raising it up to that 30 degrees, gave it a boost early in the season. These plants grew super quickly because they were getting greenhouse or hothouse temperatures, and my peppers were humongous. If you saw my pepper video, you'll know how big they were, but otherwise I definitely recommend checking out that pepper video. I'll link it for you below. For myself, I just want to document that this is the best pepper year I've ever had in my life. They're huge! And check this out. Look at all of those hot peppers. And then I'm flooded with jalapenos inside, all underneath. There's just tons, and I'm so excited. And then I got some more super hots here. It's amazing! But the poly has so many more uses beyond just being a spring or fall tool, so I really recommend trying it out in a couple different ways. And that is everything for today's video. Again, this was part 1, so make sure to stay tuned for part 2 and part 3. If they are already out, they will be in the link below for you to check out, and they'll also be here for you to watch next. Bye.